Hey guys, welcome back to Laurence McKenna on LFC channel, where I'm walking through the centre of Liverpool in the morning after the night before where we lost to PSG. Shaky camera vibes, am I right? Anyway, the city is already alive. Imagine not many of these people are PSG fans, so not many people in a great mood, though Everton, yeah. I just kind of wanted to... I've seen a lot of spiraling comments online, and I guess part of what I enjoy to talk about is the overall narrative of the club, or the overall control of the way that we tell our own story. And after a Champions League or any knockout football, it's very easy to spiral, because the moment can feel very sure. The moment can feel as if, you're in a situation where, well, we've been knocked out, we've gone out to an opponent that maybe we thought we were equal to, we thought we were better than at some point, or we would expect to be better than. And contextualizing some of a loss, or contextualizing some of a situation, I think can sometimes help with that. It's also worth saying, I've seen a lot of comments about FSG on the channel in the past 24 hours, and I think that's worth addressing, but I also think it's not about a knee-jerk reaction and saying this is one thing or the other. Again, knockout football is knockout football. Going out on penalties to a team who are very good and probably a year, maybe two ahead of you in their development, there's no shame in that. It's knockout football. That's the way it works. But at the same time, yes, it's reasonable to have an expectation. So it goes both ways, okay? First of all, I think what Slotter's done with this side has been fantastic. And yes, part of that is impacted by the owners, part of that is impacted by investment, part of that is impacted by the business model that Liverpool employ. I'm going to go this way because of the bus, right? That Liverpool employ to get to the top of the league and to remain within PSR and all these kind of things, right? I get, and I think we've known for a while, where the deficiencies in the squad are. We know that there's probably going to be one, if not two, attacking players rotated out this summer, depending on whether other people want to stay at the club. So, for instance, Luis Diaz and Darwin Nunez, but also the needs of the club. And the two things that I think is a real problem for Liverpool is availability, which, again, the boostability is availability. Slot said a very similar thing in his own chats. But also that when they are available, then the role that they can come in and play is an effective one. So I'm not really talking about Nunez's fitness or Jota's effectiveness, although both of those are currently in question. I'm talking about the fact that when we brought Darwin Nunez on, it was very clear that some of the stuff that he did frustrated Anfield and frustrated, I'm going to go with that one for a while, frustrated the team because of the nature of the game at that point. And performing in a high pressure environment is not, put it this way, it clearly wasn't one of his good attributes. I think that's fair to say. Jota also is performing at 80% fitness because we're rushing Jota back, because again, we don't have another reliable option in the team. If Darwin Nunez, who's our £80 million striker essentially, was a more trusted option, then sure. Saying that that's down to a lack of investment, I think is slightly disingenuous, to be honest, because combined, that's 120 million minimum of player that we've got the opportunity to field up front. Fair enough, right? But that should be more than enough to at least get a goal against PSG or trouble them on the night. It wasn't. And I think that's fair enough. In the sense that, well, if PSG are good enough to keep us out, there's not much else that we can do about that. You can throw any striker on at that point and they're against a very good defence. I think the issue and the crawl will come later when we see that there are other teams that score against PSG. When we see there are other sides who have systems that maybe suit PSG. We see that PSG maybe are motivated in a different way. Who knows? Like next round we might see that PSG go out to Aston Villa because they underestimate them. You're never going to underestimate this Liverpool side. And you're never going to underestimate some of the elements which we saw, for instance, Hakimi the other night, putting the PSG flag in the centre of Liverpool's pitch. That's very personal. It feels like a very personal drive from Hakimi. And it felt like something which was a thumb in the eye of the Liverpool fans and the Liverpool players. So I don't underestimate that, especially not in knockout football. Is it arrogant? Yes. I think is ill-judged at best. It's arrogant at worst. It's also slightly unusual because you've just beaten them on penalties, a team that you said you were going to come in and do the job against, and on the night you beat them by the same scoreline that they beat you by. That, by the way, that's not to say that they weren't the better team on average over the 2 legs. But that's kind of not the game of football if you just go, well, you were better. It's not the way that football works, right? Anyway, on top of that, I think it's very easy after a knockout game to say this is all FSG's fault. Is it FSG's fault? Well, maybe to an extent it is, but if you want to butterfly effect it, that Trent is in the situation that he's in, possibly. Is it FSG's fault that we've also signed 2 generational players in that time? Well, yeah, if you want to talk about those players being generational, then they signed generational players because of the model at FSG, because their stats department and the manager that they signed made them generational. We got to take the rough with the smooth here, guys. I think you've also got to take the rough with the smooth in the sense that at the start of the season, all predictions were no league title, a nice little run in the Champions League, possibly an FA Cup to get slot started, and a league cup or something like that. And that's not, when those expectations are then raised, I think that's fairly reasonable because you've underestimated them. But talks of a quadruple or talks of a double are only really there to slip up or trip up a side who are already probably outperforming expectation, maybe not their own, but fan expectation, and are only unhelpful in a run-in in a season. Like, how does it help at this point in the season to go, the owners are useless, the players are useless, we've got a cup game on the weekend, a cup final on the weekend, no less. Oh, I didn't even, there we go. When it rains, it pours, right? I didn't even press the red button. Anyway, there's a cup final on the weekend, and the league to go out there and finish and seal, right? Obviously, there's injuries around that and all these kind of things. A season will take its toll on a team. But again, I think some of the coping mechanism is to go, FSG aren't good enough. Tsimikas and Robertson, yes, we probably could replace those guys in the long run. Bradley and Trent at the start of the season, if you'd have said, do you feel comfortable with that as 2 right backs? I'd have said yes. Could we have maybe signed one more centre back? Yes. Is there a Virgil van Dijk succession plan? Most probably this summer, I'd imagine, that will begin, right? Centre mid. Did we have a big target that we were willing to spend money on? Yes. Were we willing to sign a backup that didn't seem like he had the same ability or the exact attributes that we wanted? No, because I don't think that Liverpool's transfer committee were willing to compromise in that way. Again, I'm going to say fair enough to that, guys. I think a lot of teams, and especially teams like Manchester United at the moment, are talking about, you know, we're spending 89 million this summer, Manchester United that is, on, for instance, just payments that will continue for very, very mediocre players. You know, do you want us to have to get, I mean, maybe not have to get into that situation, but sometimes I just think there's an element of we're overestimating what you can do in a transfer market because of the flawless, relatively, transfer record of Liverpool in recent years, which, by the way, has also helped the model, but that's also how the model's built, so I can't complain if that's what the model is. Sign good players, like sign people that statistically stand out to you. I can't complain about that. And I can't complain if over the past few years, we've had a really good run, and that run continues into this season. None of that is to say that FSG don't bear some responsibility for us not winning maybe more trophies in this time. Of course, they're the owners of the club. But I think billionaires and millionaires and people who are in power should always be held to account. Of course, that's the case. Like, you'd be crazy not to hold FSG to account. But if you're going to hold people to account, I think, you know, let's go for the pound of flesh idea here. Take your pound of flesh, but don't take more than that. Have your say, but don't just go blanket, this player's bad, this player's bad. I heard it in Anfield last night. It was like people were saying, Salah, you're useless. genuinely, that was a phrase that I heard from a guy who sat next but one to me, right? And I get the frustration during the game, but people were applauding Darwin Núñez's effort and acting as if Salah was not trying, which I just think is he's crying after the game. It's unusual. And I think there's got to be an element of balance. I get that there are knee-jerk reactions. Again, I get that, there's a lot of people coming on the channel last night and going, "You're not a real Scouser, you shouldn't be commenting on this, this isn't..." It's just I think that's a pretty useless piece of input anyway, if I'm quite honest, because, everyone's got a say on their team. And, what would you want me to, fake a Scouse accent so that I can act as if I have some sort of keys to the city? If I'm born in a place, if my family are born in a place, I'm going to support that club. I'm not going to go, well, that's Hackney Wick for life now. And I think this kind of toxic gatekeeping and the toxic idea of, we have to spend in order to get better is one that that's not a cycle that's going to play out while we're fans of Liverpool with FSG as owners. So no one's saying don't put up ticket prices. I think those kind of things are unreasonable. No one's saying, the match day experience or the relationship between the fans and the club, or don't do Super League or any of these kind of things. No one's saying any of those campaigns are inherently bad campaigns. I think they're great, right? And fans should be able to hold people to account. But at the same time, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that this team is terrible. They lost narrowly to a PSG side who, frankly, I think, and this is the main criticism maybe I'd have of Liverpool or of the squad, are much better rested. Because on the weekend, they could rest almost their full team. Because guess what? The competition element is not the same in their league. Because they do have different resources. Oil states have different resources to, American owners and all those kind of things. By the way, there are going to be people in the comments that go, PSG have spent this amount over the last 3 years, whereas Liverpool have spent this amount over the last 3 years. It's not really about spend. There are other elements to the way that PSG operate. There are other elements to them being in the capital, them having the resource of a nation state behind them, them being involved in certain competition, all these kind of things, them just politically, right? That's soft power. And those are things that I think Liverpool certainly are able to influence, but there are small scales that I think we don't see behind the scenes. Of course, that's a pithy, stupid argument to make when you're annoyed at your own owners. Hey, other owners are also good, is not a counter argument to that. And yes, I think it'd be great to have had a different left back last night who we could have rotated on, but we didn't bring on Tsimikas. It would have been great to have Conor Bradley, but he was injured. That's part of coping with the season. We tell Arsenal to cope, we have to cope with injuries. Konate came off, disappointing. In the midfield, I think that's where I sort of think that could have made such a difference to have one difference in the midfield. It's got to be a Zubimendi type figure for me. Otherwise, I think we're just signing a body, and I think we don't want to just be throwing bodies on the field. That doesn't make much sense to me. Otherwise, you can throw some youth on. You can just throw anyone on and just go out there and do a job. Clearly, there is a reason why Slot and Michael Edwards and Richard Hughes are all working towards signing what they consider to be high-quality players. And believe me, having interviewed and spoken to the stats guys, or a couple of them, if Liverpool had a model where they could identify cheap or cost-effective players before another side and sign them every time, I think they'd be doing that. I think there'd be a reason why they're doing that. But I think we'd have a Brighton model. We wouldn't have a Liverpool model. We'd have a Brentford model. We wouldn't have a Liverpool model. And there's a reason why teams compete, and there's a reason why teams are constantly building to compete and selling some of their players. These are all nuanced. It doesn't soothe anything. It doesn't make anything feel better the day after losing to PSG. I really didn't like the nature of the loss. And the only reason I didn't like the nature was because it felt like it petered out, which I think is, to an extent, I can understand. But also, losing to PSG, they do come across as quite a cocky side. And that hurts, because it's all right to lose against gracious winners. But when you lose to PSGs and the Real Madrids and those guys, they're not gracious winners. They're just not going to be. Anyway, look, Sun go up, sun go down. That's actually quite nice, that, isn't it? Look at that. That's very pretty. Liverpool's a beautiful city. I will be on the channel later today. Train back to London now. I'll chat to you guys later. Much love.